capacity for resistance from you. Africa deserves our respect and support in the path to development, which is why I would like to greet its leaders with warm affection. I would particularly like to acknowledge the leadership of President Yoweri Museveni, promoter of peace and stability in Africa and the world. Your Excellencies, in these challenging times, when many tactics deployed to divide the countries of the South, unity should be the order of the day for the G77 and China. It is essential and urgent for us to work effectively and together to change the current unfair world order and free ourselves from the disadvantaged positions that are a byproduct of centuries of colonialism, neo-colonialism, and dependence once and for all. 2023 was a year of great challenges and complex processes that proved how much we can accomplish when we work decisively in defense of our legitimate interests and aspirations. Thanks to the collective efforts of the members of our group, we managed to move forward on the path towards where we deserve and need to be given the current international context. The successful summit of heads of state and government of the G77 and China, which was held last September in Havana, was a necessary and urgent meeting out of which we emerged stronger. The summit of our leaders in the context of the 28th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Climate Change, or COP28, for the first time, for the first time, will set an important precedent for the future work of the G77 as regards international climate negotiations. The group has also been a key player in different UN negotiations, including those on sustainable development. It has also been involved in preparations for the Summit of the Future. The positions of the G77 have made a significant contribution to the adoption of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Cuba's leadership of the G77 and China in several international meetings outside of the group's traditional scope, such as the Summit for a New Global Financial Pact and the BRICS Summit, have allowed us to make the interests of the developing world heard in these critical fora. We would like to thank the group's members for their active and constructive participation in the different events held in Cuba last year, especially at the ministerial meetings on education, culture, tourism, and the environment. Said meetings fostered substantive debates and agreements on practical actions having to do with issues of fundamental importance for the South. We invite you to continue to work in concert on the implementation of the 17 projects designed during our presidency for the benefit of our members. Likewise, We should continue to give impetus to the G77 NAM Joint Coordination Committee, which will make our South-led proposals more coherent and efficient. Uganda's presidency of both groups this year is a step in that direction. In short, 2023 was a year of commendable collective action, which produced undeniable results, and we thank you all. Excellencies, honorable delegates, as regards our contribution to this discussion and to properly follow up on the issues covered at the G77 summit held in Havana last September, allow me to list some of our proposals for practical action your delegations may want to consider. We feel that they will help us achieve our objectives. Number one, present a draft resolution to the UN General Assembly before the end of the year on behalf of the G77 member states and China, a resolution to propose a meeting, a high-level meeting on science, technology, and innovation. This meeting should agree on practical steps forwards to guarantee that science, technology, and innovation contribute to accelerating progress towards full application of 2030 Agenda and the Addis Ababa Action Plan. Number two, to hold a meeting of ministers and high authorities of science, technology, and innovation of our group in the first half of 2025. The objective of this meeting would be to identify the main proposals that the G77 and China would put forth at said high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly. Number three, to institutionalize or make official the celebration of summits of leaders of the G77 and China in the context of the conference, the COP meetings on climate change. This initiative, which happened for the first time at COP28, held last year in Dubai, demonstrated how relevant and important it was. It would make it easier to achieve for our group to achieve concerted action regarding the divide in climate negotiations. Number four, to hold a World Forum on Science, Technology, and Innovation of countries of the South in the second half of 2024. This would show the advances that our countries have made in these areas, promote joint research projects, and different partnerships that would reduce our dependence on Western markets. This could be the ideal context in which to create strategies that would revitalize the Consortium on Science, Technology, and Innovation in the South, as agreed upon at the summit of Havana. Dear friends, for Cuba, it was very source of much pride and honor to lead the G77 and China for the first time. We did this in difficult circumstances, given that we are subjected to a criminal financial, economic, trade, and financial embargo since the second half of 2019 that was and has taken on, made even deeper. We would deeply like to thank the members of the group for the unilateral coercive measures for their support in fighting these measures and this unfair blockade and embargo that we've been subjected to for more than 60 years. In the name of the Cuban people and government, I would like to thank you sincerely to the members of the group, to the UN system, and the Secretariat of the G77 for their support, the support they have always given us throughout our leadership. Today, we pass the baton to our sister nation, Uganda, aware of this critical juncture in time that we are living through, and with the knowledge that there's still much left to do for the well-being and development of our people. Uganda can always count on the total support of Cuba. We wish you the best of luck. Cuba will always fight for the defense of unity within our rich diversity. Together, with legitimate interests and joint aspirations, we will be stronger and our voice will be heard. Thank you. Now, I would like to call His Excellency Sultan bin Al-Muharai, the Ministry of State of Foreign Affairs for the State of Qatar, which was the host country of the Second South Summit, to come up here, as well as this head of delegation of the nation of Qatar will give us a speech.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Your Excellency President Yoweri Museveni, Your Excellencies, Majesties, Heads of States and Governments, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, may the peace of God be upon you all. I address you today after a long time since the Second South Summit in Doha in 2005, whereby we issued the Doha Declaration that reiterated the values of solidarity and unified action via the Group of 77 and China in order to reiterate common interests of developing countries through developing international development and multilateral action and cooperation between the South. Distinguished guests, our developing countries require to increase and promote solidarity and cooperation in order to face the complex challenges of our world, which require us to face them unified and in concertation. Qatar lays great importance on cooperation between the countries of the South and to promote the role of G77 and China. Doha has hosted in March 2023 the 5th UN Conference of the Least Developed Countries, LDCs, whereby we have adopted the Doha Action Plan for the least developing countries for 2022-2031. And at the margin of the conference, the ministerial meeting for cooperation between the countries of the South was held, and His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani has contributed $60 million, 50 million of which will be allocated for projects that promote the resilience of least developing countries in different fields, and the contributions of Qatar in sustainability and in humanitarian aid has continued in different fora for the brotherly countries of the South countries, whereby the contributions of the South countries funds has been more than $7 billion from 2014 to 2021. Your Excellencies and Majesties, in light of developments that the Arab region has been witnessing since the 7th of October 2023, the Palestinian people is, of course, witnessing an unprecedented aggression, and here we reiterate the state of Qatar's position in supporting the, of course, still the Palestinian right in self-determination and establishing their state according to the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as their capital, and of course having their rights, which is a just, of course, position based on international law and the UN Charter and the UN resolutions. and it goes in par with the constant position of the G77 since its establishment. It is the position of all peace-loving people. Also, we call for the support and providing humanitarian assistance to civilians in the Gaza, especially in the most, of course, destroyed and affected regions. Distinguished guests, today, of course, we celebrate 60 years since the inception of G77 and China, and the G77 played a pivotal role in defending the rights of developing countries in the UN, and the G77 has, of course, achieved many successes in promoting cooperation between the countries of the South, and we still have a long way to go, and would like to reiterate again our support to the causes of the countries of the South, and we work on them seriously through our membership in the group, in G77. Mr. Chair, in conclusion, while, of course, we transfer the chairmanship to the sisterly country of Uganda, we wish you success in your endeavors and reiterate again the position of the State of Qatar that supports the countries of the South based on the principles of cooperation, consultation, and unified work and solidarity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Le expreso la gracia a su excelencia, señor Sultan bin.
Now, Sultan, thank you very much for your speech. Sultan, now I would like to call the President of the Republic of Uganda to formally take the lead of the G77 plus China for 2024.
His Excellency Salvador Paredes Mesa, Vice President of the Republic of Cuba and Chair of the G77 and China for the past 3 years, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the 78th Session of the UN General Assembly, Her Excellency the Vice President of Uganda, and all other government and party leaders of Uganda, fellow Ugandans, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to Uganda, the Pearl of Africa, for the third South Summit of the Group of 77 and China. Your personal participation at this summit, which is being held 18 years after the second summit that took place in the state of Qatar in June 2005, demonstrates your commitment to the work of the G77 and China. I commend His Excellency Miguel Mario Diaz-Canel Bermudez, President of the Republic of Cuba, for the exemplary leadership of the G77 and China in 2023. I would like to thank His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamadi Al Thani, Amir of the State of Qatar, for hosting our last summit. The group of 77 developing countries was founded in 1964 at the first session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. At the time, these countries were faced with challenges of basic development. It was the first organized effort by the developing countries to unite to steer their countries on the path of the economic development in the unjust world economic order. Building on their joint declaration at the conclusion of the first session of the UNCTAD, these 77 developing countries, at their first ministerial meeting held in Algiers, united by common aspirations, agreed to identify collective interests and to pursue their joint efforts towards economic and social development, peace, and prosperity. This unity within the group has provided it to stay on course to promote and defend its members' collective economic interests at the United Nations. We must continue to embrace the founding principles that gave life to this heterogeneous and representative group of nations. Currently, the population of G77 and China represents 80% of the global population. In addition, its GDP accounts for more than 40% of the global GDP. This shows that in spite of the challenges, the group has registered progress in defending and promoting the interests of the developing countries. Uganda welcomed the theme of the third South Summit of the G77 and China. We meet at the time where the developing countries continue to face multiple global challenges that undermine our national and collective efforts to achieve sustainable development and our national development aspirations. We are now past halfway for the 2030. Unfortunately, the overall progress in the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, as agreed at the heads of states and government and high representatives meeting held at the United Nations in September 2015, falls short of the expectations, with the developing countries lagging far behind. Therefore, this summit is an appropriate forum to speak with a common voice as leaders of the Group of 77 and China on the urgent need for effective actions to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development during the remaining 7 years to realize our vision, shared principles and commitments, particularly the eradication of poverty in all its forms and dimensions, and the pledge that no one will be left behind. Excellencies, setting the path toward the realization of leaving no one behind requires that as a group we remain united in our demand to the international community to support developing countries to urgently address the global challenges, in particular poverty, hunger, digital divide, and climate change. We continue to witness the threat to multilateralism and the rise of unilateralism, which makes all susceptible to the impact of the current unjust international economic order. At the Group of 77 and China, we should continue to work collectively to ensure that we achieve an international economic order that is just and equitable as envisaged 59 years ago at the founding of the group. Uganda remains committed to the pledge to leave no one behind. In this context, Uganda has accelerated its national efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in its entirety. We firmly believe that accelerating our progress towards the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda is critical to our national aspirations to ensure that no one is left behind, particularly during this time when we strive to build back better from the COVID pandemic and respond to other global challenges. Uganda has identified 4 key sectors of wealth creation and job creation that include commercial agriculture, industrialization, the development and modernization of services, and information and communication technology to support our socio-economic transformation. The government of Uganda is implementing targeted interventions in the above key sectors with a view to ensure that no one is left behind. In addition, we are equally prioritizing the promotion and protection of the human rights, including the right to development, in line with our national legal framework and international commitments. We wish to emphasize that the issue of human rights should be handled objectively and not politicized. South-South cooperation continues to play a critical role in supporting development countries in their efforts to achieve self-reliance. In this regard, I commend all developing countries for their contributions in strengthening this element of international cooperation. As countries in the global south, we need to uphold this solidarity, which is a pillar in helping us safeguard our collective interests. We need to strengthen trade and investments among our countries. Therefore, the African Continental Free Trade Area, CFTA, leads the way to strengthen intra-trade among African countries to ensure prosperity for the African people. As developing countries, we should support the implementation of these regional trade blocs. We must also support strengthening triangular cooperation. Leaving no one behind cannot be realized without adequately addressing the challenges and needs faced by countries in special situations, in particular African countries, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, as well as specific challenges faced by many middle-income countries, conflicts and post-conflict countries, and countries and peoples living under foreign occupation. These challenges continue to undermine the efforts of these countries to ensure that no one is left behind. In this regard, we support the call for the international community to provide targeted support to enable these countries to address their challenges. We also support the urgent reform of the international financial architecture to ensure that it is fit for purpose to respond to the financing needs of the developing countries. In our view, the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks must support the national priorities of developing countries without any conditionalities that infringe on these countries' sovereignty. Uganda is taking over the chairmanship of the group at an opportune time when we celebrate our 60th anniversary. I thank you all for entrusting Uganda with the chairing of the Group of 77 and China for 2024. We commend the African group for endorsing our candidature for the chairmanship of the Group of 77 and China. 60 years of the existence will continue after 59 years of our group's existence to yearn for a revitalized multilateral system which is capable of adequately addressing current and emerging global challenges. We firmly believe that multilateralism remains a fundamental and crucial mechanism for addressing our common challenges together as nations in solidarity. Uganda's chairmanship will strive to further promote acceleration of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, scaling up action to address climate change and biodiversity loss, strengthening international tax cooperation, financing for development, fight against illicit financial flows, and strengthening digital cooperation among others. This year, 2024, is a crucial year with various intergovernmental processes at the United Nations on issues that are of paramount importance for the group. These include the inter alia, Fourth International Conference for the Small Island Developing States, Third UN Conference on the Landlocked Developing Countries, ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council, Forum for Financing for Development Follow-up, ECOSOC, Economic Social Council High Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the Summit of the Future, Fourth International Conference on the Financing for Development, and 2024 UN Climate Change Conference, all of which demand that we at the group remain even more steadfast in promoting the interests of developing countries. Uganda, therefore, commits itself to consolidate the unity, to work for the consolidation of the unity, presence, and influence of the group in these intergovernmental processes. In this regard, we look forward to working closely together with all the members of the group in this endeavor. In conclusion, it is critical that the Group of 77 and China remains united in its pursuit of collective interests at the United Nations. In the intergovernmental processes at the United Nations, we must ensure that priorities of the group are promoted and defended. I assure you that our team, led by the permanent representative in New York, has my full support to chair the Group of 77 and China. It is our sincere hope that our chairmanship will be an invaluable new step to the path toward the realization of our aspirations as developing countries. I thank you. Thank you so much. It is now my honor to invite His Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, to address us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Excellency, Mr. Yoweri Rugata Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda and Chairman of the Group of 77 and China. Your Excellency, Mr. Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez, President of the Republic of Cuba. Their Excellencies, the Heads of State and Government. Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished ministers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. I feel both honored and privileged to address this august convocation on behalf of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Let me begin by conveying my sincere appreciation to His Excellency President Museveni and to the government of Uganda for hosting this third South Summit, a momentous event highlighting the unshakable commitment of the G77 and China to advancing multilateralism and global cooperation as the centerpiece for achieving the noble goals of the United Nations. Uganda's assumption of the chairmanship coincides with the group's 60th anniversary. I have no doubt that with such capable leadership, Uganda will confidently carry forth the torch of leadership for a prosperous, united, and stronger South. I should also like to recognize and commend the outgoing dynamic chair, Cuba, for its extraordinary and insightful leadership of the group during these trying times of geopolitical tensions and multifaceted challenges. Excellencies, our world is confronted by a confluence of crises, from the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic to rising inflation, from a worsening crisis of debt distress to the harsh realities of climate change, which for many, especially the most vulnerable, is a real existential threat. In parallel, escalating geopolitical tensions, wars, and conflicts have risen to the fore, shattering the lives of millions and putting the safety and security of the entire planet at risk. At the forefront of these is the harrowing humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip. Generations of families suffering irreparable trauma and loss, children undergoing amputations without anesthesia, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble in one fell swoop. With half the population facing starvation and tens of thousands dead in just over 100 days, the world is looking to the United Nations for answers. The General Assembly has not sat idly in the face of this crisis. It has been both active and ambitious, often led by this very group of member states. It has demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire for all parties to comply with their obligations under international law and for the immediate release of all hostages and humanitarian access. I assure you that I shall not tire of reiterating these urgent demands, and I will do so for as long as it takes. I count on the collective leadership of this group to do the same. In tandem, we are witnessing mounting frustration with and the complete rejection of an unjust world order which continuously relegates the interests of the global South to the margins of the international community's list of priorities. Now more than ever, the G77 and all nations must come together and build bridges of dialogue, hope, and cooperation to create a more fair, more just, and more prosperous world for all. Your presence here today as leaders of the Global South underscores the fact that the Group of 77 and China, as the largest and most diverse group in the United Nations, has a pivotal role to play in shaping a new world order that is more inclusive and leaves no one and no country behind. While our challenges today are profound and perverse, the reality is that we have been struggling for quite some time. Several developing countries had already veered off course in their pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, even prior to the pandemic and the extant conflicts we see today. Not surprisingly, the most vulnerable of our societies have borne the brunt of these adverse external events, with countless pushed back into hunger and poverty. and environmental emergencies, including climate change, have only grown in severity and impact year on year without robust and adequate climate action for course correction. Against this backdrop, our cherished multilateral system, the policy apparatus for problem-solving international cooperation, is facing an acute crisis, with legitimate questions of current relevance and credibility arising and intensifying time and again. Purposeful dialogue, solidarity, and cooperation are in retreat, clearing an opportunistic path for divisive forces that breathe paralysis and disaffection. We are quite literally at a fork in the road. We must therefore seize the opportunity of summits such as this to rededicate ourselves to the core values and principles that remain as relevant and compelling today as they ever were. Multilateral organizations, including the United Nations and the international financial institutions, must undergo urgent and radical reform to better recognize and leverage the significance of the Global South. We need an international financial system rooted in inclusion and equity, inspiring and bolstering the full commitment to multilateralism, fostering SDG-aligned investments, and breaking the vicious cycle of debt and interest compounding for developing countries. We must harness the full power and opportunities of South-South and triangular cooperation, not per se to supplant our relations with the North, but rather to rebalance them and thereby magnify the global resonance of the stubborn unity and solidarity of the South. We all know that the G77 and China is no stranger to strife and perseverance, precisely because it was founded on a robust solidarity with the aim of furthering the principles of multilateralism. A majority of the G77 members have shared histories of colonialism, struggles of liberation, struggles for liberation, equality, and the pursuit of independence. Along with the lasting legacy of resilience, these are the cornerstones to the unity that historically binds the G77. And these must continue to be embraced as the group's collective strength in the face of the enormous risks and threats ahead. As President of the General Assembly, I am committed to these very priorities and principles: solidarity, cooperation, inclusion, and not forgetting support for the most vulnerable, so that we remain faithful to our own dictum of leaving no one behind. This new year offers an opportunity to shift our collective trajectory and to make common cause in our determination to craft a new narrative that incentivizes and supports effective global transformation in bringing those left out, overlooked, and perhaps even forgotten into the mainstream of sustainable development. A series of pivotal events on the UN Sustainable Development calendar are noteworthy. First is the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States in Antigua and Barbuda. Secondly, the 3rd United Nations Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries in Rwanda. And thirdly, the first ever UN General Assembly Sustainability Week, a flagship initiative of my presidency, being convened from the 15th to the 19th of April 2024 at UN headquarters, focusing on sustainability themes in selected sectors, namely tourism, transport, energy, infrastructure, as well as a signature event on debt sustainability, which of course is a major concern to members of the G77. Sustainability Week will build on the 2023 SDG Summit and seek to accelerate our path to 2030 in order to achieve the promise of the SDGs as well as that of the Paris Agreement. I am confident I can count on the constructive engagement of the G77 and China at the highest possible level to ensure that this week amply positions us to take forward what will unarguably be the defining multilateral process of our generation, that of the Summit of the Future. The summit aspires, among other things, to accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda, to rectify key governance gaps, and to ensure member states uphold their commitments to development. The G77 and China must play a crucial role in shaping the outcome of the summit, insofar as it will recalibrate the relationship between the global North and the South. In that regard, the application of modern technology to support human welfare will be a key area of focus, and so the G77 will need to be alert to ensure that such technologies contribute to closing as distinct from increasing the development gap. I also encourage your continued engagement in the intergovernmental negotiations for the Declaration on Future Generations and the Global Digital Compact, the potential economic benefits of which are extraordinary, though with probable social and societal risks. How we balance the benefits versus the costs is a critical issue for contemplation by the G77 and China. I call upon you all to actively support impactful transformation, a transformation that goes beyond statistics and annual reports, one that instead translates into tangible human and developmental progress, that creates a more secure, safe, and peaceful world and a more sustainable planet. Despite the challenges, I am certain that together we can seize this moment to unlock new commitments and adopt innovative policies that leave no one behind. Excellencies, together as one G77 and China, let us commit at this summit to work even harder to rebuild trust, to reignite global solidarity, and to harness the power and potential of multilateralism to secure and deliver peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for everyone, everywhere. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the 78th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations.
Your Excellency, President Museveni, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. It is a pleasure to join you for this very important summit. I thank the government of Uganda for its hospitality and congratulate it on the leadership of the G77 plus China. 60 years ago, recognizing the need for unity and solidarity in the face of common challenges, the G77 was born. Over the decades, you have been an engine for South-South cooperation and development, lifted millions of people out of poverty, and provided a powerful voice for developing countries on the global stage. Today, you are the largest grouping of the Global South, representing 80% of the world's population. And your solidarity and partnership are essential to building a sustainable, peaceful and just world for all. A world in which the United Nations Charter, international law and human rights prevail in global relations. Excellencies, halfway to the 2030 deadline for the Sustainable Development Goals, far from leaving no one behind, we are leaving half the world behind. Progress on poverty and hunger is stalling, and in some countries going into reverse. Many G77 members are grappling with an economic hangover from the COVID-19 pandemic, crippling debts, a cost of living crisis, and sky borrowing costs. Hundreds of millions of people around the world, particularly women and girls, are living without the most basic respect for their human rights, and the lack of jobs is generating enormous frustration among young people. Climate disasters, most of you did little to create, are knocking chunks out of your economies and increasing people's suffering. Investment in sustainable development and climate action is slipping further out of reach. And while South-South cooperation is strong and deepening, it does not replace the need for the respect of the commitment of the Global North, for sustained engagement to reduce poverty and inequality, support growth, and build resilience in developing countries. Digital technologies have enormous potential for good, but they are also inflaming inequalities. The International Monetary Fund warns that artificial intelligence could make things even worse. And peace, the foundation of sustainable development, is breaking down amidst a climate of global impunity. Around the world, from Sudan to Ukraine, the Middle East and beyond, wars are devastating lives, fueling mass movements of people, disrupting global supply chains, and threatening to set entire regions alight. In Gaza, Israel's military operations have spread massive destruction and killed civilians on a scale unprecedented during my time as Secretary General, including more than 150 members of our own staff, following the horrific terror attacks by Hamas on 7 October. This is heartbreaking and utterly unacceptable. The Middle East is a tinderbox. We must do all we can to prevent conflict igniting across the region. And that starts with an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to relieve the suffering in Gaza, allow humanitarian aid to reach everyone in need, and facilitate the release of hostages, which should be immediate and unconditional. The repeated refusal yesterday to accept the two-state solutions for Israeli and Palestinians is totally unacceptable, as I told the summit of the non-aligned movement. The denial of the right to statehood for the Palestinian people would indefinitely prolong a conflict that has become a major threat to global peace and security, exacerbate polarization, and embolden extremists everywhere. Excellencies, righting our troubled world depends on effective global action. Yet the international system is out of date, out of time, and out of step, reflecting a bygone age when many of your countries were still colonized. The United Nations Security Council is paralyzed by geopolitical divisions, and its composition does not reflect the reality of today's world. It must be reformed. And the global financial system, including the Bretton Woods institutions, have failed to provide a global safety net for developing countries in distress, as it was created after the Second World War in a totally different global economic situation. Yet, amidst all this gloom, there is hope. Last year, the SDG Summit issued a strong political declaration thanks in large part to the advocacy and tenacity of G77 countries. And this year, we have an opportunity to build on that success. The Summit of the Future, to be held in New York in September, is a generational opportunity. It aims to reform and revitalize multilateralism so that it works for everyone, everywhere, and meets the challenges of today. It is a chance to create the conditions for countries to achieve the SDGs, to find consensus on frameworks to address new challenges, and to build a better world for us all. We rely on the G77 plus China to make the Summit of the Future a success, to seize this opportunity and to find common solutions. The Summit will consider deep reforms of the international financial architecture. Financial institutions and frameworks created after the Second World War still largely correspond to the power relations and the global economy of that time. They must be reformed so that they are truly universal, reflect with justice the realities of today, and are much more responsive to the needs of developing countries. I have also proposed an SDG stimulus of $500 billion a year in affordable long-term finance for sustainable development and climate action in developing countries. And the multilateral development banks must be adequately capitalized and must change their business models to leverage far more private finance for developing countries at reasonable costs. The SDG stimulus calls for urgent action on debt, including breathing space for countries facing unbearable repayment schedules. And it calls for the expansion of the contingency financing for countries in need, including through the rechanneling of special drawing rights. Momentum is building. All countries backed these proposals in the SDG summit last year, but now we must turn them into reality. So, Excellencies, beyond the Summit of the Future, I ask you to unite against climate catastrophe. The very existence of some countries in this room depends on limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in light of different national circumstances. I urge you to hold developed countries to account for climate justice and for leading an equitable and just transition based on the phase-out of fossil fuels and massive investment in renewable energy. All financial commitments must be met. Clarifying the delivery of the $100 billion and doubling adaptation finance by 2025 are only starting points. The Loss and Damage Fund is a step forward and a testament to the power of the Global South. But we must call for meaningful contributions that have not yet been announced. And we must also advocate for an ambitious new finance goal for the future at COP29. And we must not forget that the just and equitable energy transition includes producing and trading critical minerals in a way that is fair, sustainable, and provides maximum benefit to developing countries. They must be more than simple exporters of raw materials. Excellencies, new technologies can turbocharge progress towards the SDGs. Our proposed Global Digital Compact aims to ensure that in a new technological era, no one is left behind. And I hope it will be agreed at the Summit of the Future. And the high-level body on artificial intelligence that I created, which includes several experts from G77 countries, and is balanced 50% North and 50% South, has already made preliminary recommendations on global artificial intelligence governance, including with the objective of accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals. The new Scientific Advisory Board is also working to ensure scientific breakthroughs are shared equally for the benefit of all. And I praise the efforts done by the Presidency of Cuba to put science and technology in the center of G77 concerns. I encourage you to engage in all these efforts. The 21st century cannot replicate the vast inequalities of the 20s. Do not let new rules for new technologies be written by the rich for the rich. Excellencies, let us face it, those that benefit most from the present global governance system are unlikely to lead its reform. So momentum for change must come from you. I urge you to keep driving these efforts forward. We have a chance to cultivate a just, peaceful and prosperous future where no one is left behind. But for that, a lot needs to be changed and reformed. Together, let's unite to fight to make it a reality, and I thank you.
I thank His Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Liu Guozheng, Special Representative of the President of China, member of the Political Bureau of the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee, and Vice Premier of the State Council of the People's Republic of China, as a special guest.
Your Excellency, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, and heads of international organizations, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to attend this South Summit as the special representative of President Xi Jinping. I wish to express my appreciation to the government of Uganda for its thoughtful arrangements and congratulations on their assumption of chairmanship. And I want to thank Cuba's efforts and contribution in the past period. The title of my speech is Seeking Strength Through Unity and Forging Ahead with Enterprise to Jointly Write a New Chapter in South Cooperation. This year marks the 60th anniversary of the founding of the Group of 77, or G77. Over the past 6 decades, mechanisms such as the G77 and China have been instrumental in helping countries of the South beat a right path forward, one that advocates equality, mutual trust, mutual benefit, solidarity, and mutual assistance. Today, the G77 counts more than 130 member states, covering over 2/3 of the UN membership, and has become an important force to be reckoned with in international affairs. Its achievements are a source of pride, and its experience is truly valuable. Independence is the defining political feature of countries of the South. Most countries of the South share a past of trudging through the mire of colonialism. We do not flinch in safeguarding national independence and dignity, and we do not slacken in exploring development paths suited to our national realities. We never succumb to external interference, strive to safeguard the rights to subsistence and development, resolutely reject hegemonism and power politics, and hold firm in our own hands the future of our country's development and the well-being of our nations. In an ever-changing international landscape, we have gained a strong foothold and at the same time promoted the progress of human society. Seeking strength through unity is a glorious tradition of countries of the South. President Xi Jinping pointed out that South-South cooperation is a great creative undertaking by developing countries to seek strength through unity. We have been deepening South-South cooperation, advancing North-South dialogue, and standing together in international affairs. The G77 and China is our important cooperation mechanism within the framework of the UN. Countries of the South have also created such platforms as the BRICS and the African Union to send common messages and uphold shared interests. Not long ago, the BRICS realized a historic expansion, which strengthened the momentum of solidarity and cooperation among emerging markets and developing countries, and boosted the morale of the Global South to forge ahead in unity. Pursuing development and rejuvenation is a historical mission of countries of the South. Seizing opportunities of economic globalization, countries of the South have been promoting trade and investment, liberalization and facilitation, and carrying out bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation, thereby realizing fairly fast economic and social development. Today, countries of the South account for half of the world economy, 42% of global trade, and half of high-tech exports. We are visibly narrowing the gap with developed countries. Countries of the South now contribute to nearly 60% to global growth, according to statistics from international institutions. Equity and justice are the common aspiration of countries of the South. We always address major international issues based on their merits, making fair remarks and taking fair actions. In mechanisms including the UN, the G20, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, we have played a constructive role. We have made it possible to establish New Development Bank, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Silk Road Fund, among other financial institutions, guiding the trend of international cooperation and making the global governance system more fair and equitable. Ladies and gentlemen, changes unseen in a century are unfolding at a faster pace in the world, and the collective rise of countries of the South is unstoppable. Yet, the unjust and inequitable international political and economic order from the past continues to have lingering effects. Factors hindering world peace and development have not been eradicated, and countries of the South are facing an increasingly complex external environment. We need to renew our efforts to forge a united, equal, balanced, and inclusive global development partnership and build a community with a shared future for mankind. To this end, I wish to put forward 3 proposals. First, we need to be brave and determined in exploring our path to modernization. Modernization as an aspiration is universal among all countries, but the ways leading to it cannot fit into one single model. We need to put our people at the center, stay grounded in our own realities and traditions, learn from other civilizations, and explore paths to modernization that fit our own development. We need to seize the opportunities created by the latest round of technological revolution and industrial transformation, thus achieving leapfrog economic and social development. China is advancing the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization. We look forward to joining hands with countries of the South and achieving modernization together, leaving no one behind. Second, we need to pursue higher quality South-South cooperation. Countries of the South at various stages of development and with diverse endowments of resources enjoy considerable complementarities in economic structures. We need to seek strength through unity, enhance the synergy of development strategies, and continue to unlock the potential for cooperation to make countries of the South more competitive as a whole. China is ready to focus on practical cooperation and capacity building and conduct cooperation in a broader way and in more areas to unleash the potential for growth, address the difficulties holding back development, and improve people's well-being. Third, we need to actively participate in the reform of the global governance system, complying to the common call of all countries, especially developing countries, and raising our representation and voice in meaningful ways is critical to tackling the age-old problems in international governance. We need to jointly call for an equal and orderly multipolar world and a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization. Build an open world economy, firmly promote trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, resolutely oppose the attempt to roll back globalization and abuse the concept of security, and foster a global environment conducive to the development of countries of the South. We need to jointly support the reform of the WTO and the international financial system, and to make international development agencies more efficient in supporting countries of the South. We need to bring development to the center of the global economic policy framework, urge developed countries to earnestly deliver on their commitments of official development assistance and climate financing, and speed up the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Poverty is a primary challenge for the development of countries of the South. China encourages the UN Secretary General to nominate a special envoy for poverty eradication in order to promote global poverty reduction. Ladies and gentlemen, China firmly supports countries of the South in realizing common development. In the early days of its founding, New China began assisting other countries to the best of its capacity. More than 70 years on, thousands of complete projects and projects for providing goods and materials have been implemented. Over 10,000 technical cooperation projects have been conducted, and over 400,000 training opportunities have been provided to developing countries. In all these endeavors, we have never attached political strings or interfered in other countries' internal affairs, winning deep friendship from countries of the South. In recent years, President Xi Jinping has put forward the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, the Global Development Initiative, GDI, and the Global Security Initiative, GSI, and the Global Civilization Initiatives, GCI. The aim is to promote common development, lasting stability, enduring security, and mutual learning among civilizations, and laying the groundwork for a bright prospect of peace, security, prosperity, and progress in the world. Belt and Road Cooperation has had more than 3,000 projects and galvanized over $1 trillion of investment globally in the past decade since its launch. The GDI has generated more than 10 international cooperation platforms in its 8 priority areas and over 200 cooperation projects on the ground. Working closely with 20 international organizations, China has implemented over 130 trilateral cooperation projects in nearly 60 countries in areas such as poverty reduction, food security, public health, and climate change. More than 30 million people have benefited from these projects. And the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development received a good boost. President Xi Jinping has underlined that China, as a developing country and one of the global South, has invariably stood in solidarity with fellow developing countries through thick and thin. China will continue to take South-South cooperation as a priority in its cooperation with other countries, stand together and work in concert with G77 members, and contribute to the common development of countries of the South with its philosophy and progress in pursuing Chinese modernization. Thank you.
I want to thank His Excellency Liu Guozhong for his statement, and this brings us to the end of the opening session. We are now going for a group photograph, and when we come back, the press are declared undesirable and they should not be here. We should be only the conference people. I thank you. Let's continue to the next program.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, honorary heads of delegation, honorary heads of states and heads of delegation will be exiting through the front door. The rest of us should remain seated. And as His Excellency announced, when we return, it will be a closed session. The media and observers will stay out, but will advise observers and invited guests when they return. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, keep seated apart from heads of states and heads of delegation, please.
Well, today seamlessly transitioned from the non-aligned movement summit into the G7 7+ China summits, and of course the president of Uganda, His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, has assumed chairmanship of the G7 7+ China summit right this morning. We've been streaming for you live from Speak Resort Munyonyo, and we will keep bringing you details and updates regarding the G7 7+ China summits. Up next will be a closed door meeting between heads of state, but we will be giving you the details of those when we get a hold of them. Cuba was the last to host the G7 7+ China summit, and today His Excellency the Vice President of Cuba, Salvador Valdez Mesa, has given the baton, passed the baton to Uganda's President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. We've had different speeches given this morning, and among those was for the UN Secretary General, that is Antonio Guterres. And among the things he said, as we approach the 2030 deadline with the commitment of leaving no one behind, he said, we are faltering in our progress, advances in alleviating hunger and poverty, and this is dwindling and certain countries are regressing. That was Antonio Guterres while addressing the G77 plus China. Well, my name is Olive Monica Najuma, and in studio with me is Professor Sarah Sali, the Associate Professor, School of Women and Gender Studies, College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Makerere University. Many thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm hoping you're okay. You look beautiful this morning.
Thank you.
So now, as we have all these conversations centering about development and also leaving no one behind, this is the theme for the G77 plus China Summit. When we speak about leaving no one behind, I'm going to be a bit selfish here and start where my gender is concerned. And as someone that is experienced when it comes to matters of women and of course gender, when we see these summits happening in the country, and of course when we hear statements like leaving no one behind, what does that mean for women?
Thank you very much. Normally what leaving no one behind means is that there's been actually a category left behind. It means previous development processes have not been very intentional at bringing people on board. And you see, if you just follow the common principles, if you just follow a merit-based system without asking who is on the table and who is off the table, you'll end up actually missing some people on the table. First of all, we have to look at how G77 comes up. This was at an UNCTAD meeting where certain countries discovered, particularly of the Global South, that the international economic system was heavily dominated by countries in the Global North. And why was this possible? Because the countries of the Global North had most of the countries in the Global South had largely been colonized by countries in the Global North. So they were all cultivated or integrated in the global economic order as appendages or as extensions of countries in the Global North. So even after political independence, that kind of unfair relationship existed, where things like quotas were an issue, special drawing rights, and all those kinds of things. So I think it is around 1964 that these countries realized this is no longer sustainable. How do we have a South-to-South cooperation to have a bigger voice so that we can have a stronger negotiation power? So well, it's no longer...
Professor, before you continue, what you see on the screen right now is a group photo of the members of the leaders of the G77 plus China Third South Summit. They are taking a group photo at the Speak Resort Munyonyo, and this is a pivotal moment for Uganda because we are the third to host this summit since it was the G77 was formed way back in 1964. Professor, you can continue.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe you should also just add that while we are the third, we are hosting on behalf of Africa.
Yes.
The Continental Summit hosting have been moving the summit hosting has been moving according to continents. So to be the first to host on behalf of the continent is a very important thing.
Yes, so right now we are waiting for President Museveni to join them, and then the group photo will be taken, and that will be now pasted on different walls. And this is history being made because, like the professor said, we are hosting the G77 plus China summit on behalf of East Africa, but also Africa at large. We are the first African country to host it.
Yes.
Pivotal moment, that is.
Indeed, it's a pivotal moment.
Yes.
So, thank you. So, as I was explaining before, the arrival of these formerly colonized states in an unfair global economic system required them to reorganize and come together to say, how do we spur development in the global south, but also how do we change the relations? The way you've had the UN Secretary General and the President of China speak How do we change the economic relation so that it's not just a way of one-way exploitation, but where there's more collaboration? Because at the end of the day, it's about sustainable development. Now, going back to the issue of gender and leaving no one behind. I mean, women have been left behind in all spaces and in all fora, because for a long time, people never paid attention to gender diversity or to gender differences. So the assumption was to look at monolithic categories, either monolithic categories around race, African, whites, Chinese, and everybody else, or to look at monolithic categories around class. So you have the poor, you have the rich, you have... But you see, when you look deeper, when you shine the torch deeper, you'll find that even within those areas of global exclusion, there is another layer of exclusion which is defined by gender, which is defined by region, which is defined by location, which is defined by religion, by tribe, by everything. So women have generally been left behind because global politics has always been shaped by men. And by extension, things like UNCTAD, from which the G77 come from, and other UN systems, which is really a consortium of heads of state, have been largely male spaces, dominated by male actors. So seeing things from the male perspective, okay? So while they were well-intentioned, planning at national level, it took time for them to say, okay, who is being left behind? How else do we spur development in these areas? And it took research of what they called Esther Bosrap in the 70s to show that actually women were already in economic development, but they were not counted as such.
And they were key decision makers.
They were key decision makers. They were key producers. And at that time, what Esther Bosrap did was to distinguish between male farming systems and female farming systems. Because while in Europe and the US, traditionally men were the ones out farming, and therefore the farming industry grew up like that. And of course, farming industry spurred the factories, and spurred economic development. So the productive sector grew in that kind of male-biased manner. So the assumption and the stereotype was that women were passive consumers or secondary consumers of the efforts and labors of men, of the sweat of men. But when Esther Bosrap came to the global south, especially in Africa, she realized that actually where farming systems were outward, they were largely dominated by women. So in her work in the 70s, which informs...
Well, right this minute, President Yoweri Museveni has joined the other heads of state and delegates to take the historic picture that is going to be now plastered in different offices. And of course, around the globe, it will be known that Uganda has taken the mantle to be chairman of the G77 plus China. Historic moment this is. As you can see, the president, the picture has been taken, and the president is now ushering his guests away from the picture venue. Now, continuing the professor.
Okay, yeah, so what Esther Bosrap discovered and informed the UN at the time was that the women were largely involved in agriculture. Women were largely involved in production, but they were not counted as such. And that's why you have this move of or what we call women in development, which then later on moves into gender and development, and now we have so many other things. But I'll just give an example. When you come to Uganda, Uganda exports this number of tons of coffee, this number of tons of cotton and tea and all of that kind. Have you ever paid attention to find out actually who is producing it? Because at the end of the day, when the tea is going, it's going either as Kayonza tea, the coffee is going as BCU tea, coffee, or Chagalanyi coffee, and that kind of thing. But when you turn it down, you find that when it comes to Africa, with small-scale holdings, actually it is the women who are doing the planting, they are dominating in the weeding, they are dominating in the harvesting of these things, and they are doing a lot of things, which finally goes out that. You can even look today at issues like the tourism industry. Of course, you look, a lot of crafts are being made by women. Occasionally, when they are lucky, stewards get to buy from them directly, but otherwise it's collected by those with big money and goes. So leaving no one behind is a good strategy, because for starters, these people who are not being seen are already doing the work. They are already doing the development. But because they are unseen, because they are largely playing in the informal sector, the issue is not to plan for them. So when we hear about planning for development, we are talking about big things like infrastructure, you're talking about a road network, you're talking about electricity network, you're talking about bringing down the costs of production for factories and industries, you're talking about improving the production chain in terms of cooling plants. But as long as they remain big and we don't say how, and I think you heard what the Chinese head of delegation said there about appropriate technology. If we don't say, okay, who else is in and how do we plan to bring them on board, they will actually continue being left behind. And that's why if you followed the side event of the women at the NAM,
yes,
they raised the things that affect them. One is low production capacity, because they have low capital, and then because there is no industrialization for them, most of their things are sold at distress sales to avoid total sales, total loss of produce. So at the end of the day, their cost of production is much higher than actually what they earn from their production, because no one has intentionally thought about how to make that sector gainful and productive.
Okay, pertinent issues being raised by the professor here. I like the theme, because it's the theme for the G77 plus China summit this year. It says leaving no one behind, and when you listen to that, you can't help but feel included. And when he was addressing the delegates, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said millions of individuals globally, particularly women and girls, endure a lack of basic respect for their human rights. And he went ahead to say that the scarcity of employment opportunities is leading to significant frustration, particularly among the youth. Now, Professor Sally, still speaking about women, when he says that globally women endure a lack of basic respect for their human rights, and then he also mentions employment, I would like for us to first of all start there. When it comes to employment, there has been conversations regarding employment or unfair pay when it comes to women globally.
Yes.
And when you hear a theme by developing countries plus China saying that we want to leave no one behind, what I hear, like you said, what I hear here is that we don't want to leave someone behind in the world of employment, in the world of production, in the world of mining, whichever system, corporation, whatever we are working on, no one is supposed to be left behind. But what what women have been experiencing, and you've heard what women have been saying over the years. You will find that in different industries, let's say the arts, women will say we are not being paid as well as our male counterparts. You go to other industries, you will still encounter the same problem. But they say, let's say in the corporate world, they will say we do the same jobs, we work the same hours, but we are not being paid the same. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, the story of women and gender inequality in employment or in production is very old. It's one of the things actually which drove a lot of women's movements in the global north or in the global west, in Europe and the US. The whole fact that women do the same jobs as men, but tend to, at that point for them, the concern was women did the same jobs as men, but were not being paid the same kind of wage. So they call it discrimination in pay. And that, I think, in some areas continues to thrive, because how you're paid and how much you're paid in the developed world remains a very secretive issue.
Yes.
Now, when you come to our countries, because of underdevelopment, the opportunities for employment are low. And that then brings on board certain challenges. One of the challenges, are coming out of that, is women then tend to be prioritized for the menial jobs that are low paying, that are repetitive. And the key example here has been the textile industry in Asia, where you find, because of the high cost of labor in the Western countries, cloth chains like those wonderful fashion designers you have decide to take their production to India, to Bangladesh, to Thailand, and to China.
To get cheap labor.
To get cheap labor. And who are these cheap labor? It's women in their homes. And what happens with that kind of labor? You are either put in a sweatshop together, working with, and you're paid per piece you make. There are no things like social security. There are no things like insurance in case you lose your finger or your arm in these production processes. So that is one form of exploitation. You come to countries like Uganda, where we don't have much in terms of manufacturing, but we have a lot in terms of agriculture. So where are the women being exploited? In farms like tea estates, I mean, they work the whole day, the whole evening, sorting. It's the same menial concept of menial jobs, repetitive jobs. Or if you're talking about flower farms, working so hard but without protective gear. And there's been this anecdotal allegation that a lot of them lose their fingers, and some have developed, I don't know what kind of diseases, from exposure to those bare chemicals. So you have different forms of exploitation, labor exploitation, but around females. In our own case in Uganda, you have seen many of our young girls living to the Middle East, and they say they have to go to the Middle East because that's the only job that's available to them. And a few of them have had wonderful stories, but also social media has been dominated by those who have experienced bad relationships. And if you were on the news last week, if you are aware, I think the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi have decided to reduce the cost, the intake, but also the wage they are going to pay. So labor exploitation occurs in so many ways. And of course, in Africa as a whole, the development in Africa, we don't want to say that it has only affected women. The labor exploitation also affects the males. For example, you will find now, I've talked about where women are included, but underpaid or mistreated. You talked about the arts. So we've also had cases of sexual harassment there. So those are also yet to be proven. Now, there are also cases where women are excluded. Where, for example, you have a project and your project or program is in a district, let's say maybe Soroti, I'm using this as an example, and then they also have a branch in Kamuli, and then they have a branch in, let's say, Mbale and Iganga. So instead of hiring 5 program officers for that region, you hire one person, and the advert says you want them to be able to drive, they must be computer literate, they must be this, they must be that. And then you target one person to do that. And the one person to do that will actually be a male. Because he can move, he can be on Monday in Kamuli, on Tuesday in Iganga, on Wednesday in Mbale, on Thursday in Soroti, and then Friday comes back to Kampala. And this person is on the road, but actually is being paid the salary of one person. Okay?
And he's doing jobs of 5
of around
people.
5. He's the one balancing the accounts, and then he's also doing the computer, so he must be able to read the spreadsheets. So it is also another form of labor exploitation, but he is included. So where the demand is like that, the women will be perceived as an undesirable workforce, because the stereotypical thinking is the woman will not manage that kind of circuit and that. So the gender and labor exploitation occurs in different ways, but it all boils down to underdevelopment in these spaces. That's why when the G77 gets together to say, let us work together, build trade amongst ourselves, build our economic viability, that will have appropriate technology, how do we leverage science and technology to leapfrog development in these countries, it's important, because all these things, because we are really sharing poverty, we are sharing limited resources. Can we expand the pie so that we all have different shares of it?
That's true. And the president actually in his speech said we need to have more free trade zones so that we can now expand and be able to export Africa's goods to the rest of the world. Because the other encumbrance we have been struggling with as developing countries is that we will export the raw material, and then we will have to pay an arm and a leg to buy finished products made out of the raw materials that we have produced. And the president has been really vocal about us being able to refine our raw materials and now start exporting a finished product. And it goes without saying, if you export a kilo of coffee, you are going to sell it at less than the price you would have sold it at if you were exporting, you know, processed coffee that has been well packaged, you know, made in Uganda. Yes. So now, speaking of the same, I like where you keep saying that some of the issues that we are grappling with as women and as nations as a whole is underdevelopment. Now, you were part of the summit of the women in agribusiness in Munyonyo that happened on the sidelines of the NAM summit. What were some of the sectors? I know this is agribusiness, but agribusiness involves a lot. Could you briefly share some of the products women are, you know, putting on the market as far as agribusiness is concerned?
Thank you very much. Maybe the first correction is that I was not part of the summit, but I keenly followed. Yeah, so the major sectors, of course, are agriculture, and the major sectors are crafts, okay? And then some issues in the tech world. But again, these are all areas where they are all concentrated. And so the competition is heavy, and because of too heavy competition, the prices come down. So we don't see, there was not much in terms of manufacturing, because Uganda in general doesn't have much in terms of manufacturing. And that's why they raised the challenges around production, around value addition, and around reduction of taxation for those who are in import and export. And I think, of course, I know there are those who bring in things from Turkey, and there are some in actual business, but largely it was agribusiness, it was agricultural, as you were saying. So you talked about countries, I mean, how our president emphasizes value addition. Yes. And this has been his emphasis from the beginning. But we also have to know the challenges against us, that it is not just that we are not aware, or the country is not aware that it needs to export finished products. Yes. The issue is that those who buy from us in the global north don't want to buy finished products.
They want us to
buy raw materials, because they don't want to pay a higher price for our processed coffee. So a country like Germany will insist that they want Uganda's coffee as raw coffee. If you take it there as, actually no one will allow you to take it there as finished product. That's why the recent, I think it was last year when there was the summit of Africa in the USSR, in Russia. Yes. And that one was important because it did allow, some of those other trade blocs are beginning to allow for freedoms and listen more to what Africa has to say. Why many African countries went to the Russia summit is because it's providing an alternative. It's ready to take finished products. So now when you have a summit like the G77, which is formed to decry the unfair trade relations, it's very important because, first of all, if other people don't want to take our finished products, can we amongst ourselves, we were initially 77, I think we are now 134.
134 plus China.
Plus China. Can we trade amongst ourselves? Is China ready to take our coffee as a finished processed coffee? Even if it's not China, can Ghana take it? That's why we have the AFTA and things like that. So the only challenge we have is we don't have much trade amongst ourselves. And could be because of the limited infrastructure in terms of road network. Ideally, when UN Women did a research on women in trade, it found that actually 70% of informal cross-border trade amongst intra-trade amongst African countries accounted for 70% of household incomes. But when tabulated on board, it only accounts for 48%.
48%
of Africa's trade. When it comes to East Africa, there is a lot of informal trade occurring among the East African countries. But when computed according to the global indicators, our trade amongst ourselves is only 3.8% or 8.5%. It's very small, it's less than 10%. So summits like this should help us focus and say, okay, if the North, if the global trade pacts are not favorable to the G77 countries. Can the Global South organize itself and promote trade among itself? That's why they talk about the South-South cooperation. So these are like Third South Summit and Leaving No One Behind and South-South cooperation, which the G7 is, which I just started, is about. So what can we find if Germany cannot take our processed coffee, and all of us, let's say in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, DRC, we are producing coffee, Ethiopia. Who else can take our coffee? Can Nigeria take it? Can Ghana take it? Can Jordan take it? Can other countries take it? So, and I think when we do that and improve our revenue from our production through value addition, then more money will go into the economy and produce and grow some of this infrastructure. On a positive note, the number of road networks which have been planned around the African continent, there is the whole issue of opening up the road network from Cape Town to Cairo. We've always sung about that. But also there's the one coming from Maputo Beira up to Kinshasa. Then there is the one from Morocco down to Dakar, and from Dakar into Gabon. So the understanding is that we have limited trade amongst ourselves, especially as Africans, because there's limited connectivity between these countries. Our flights amongst ourselves is so expensive, but also the road network is so bad because you move, you're faced with a mountain, you're faced with a river, you're faced with a forest. So they're trying to open up these trade routes. They are long-term projects, but they will help move trade amongst the countries. Yes.
I like the part where you say that connectivity between different, for instance, African countries is either expensive or hard because of the poor road network. And on that note, we have had conversations regarding visas to some of these countries. If you're, for instance, in Uganda, to go to a country like South Africa, you must go through a gruesome visa process before you can travel to South Africa. And there are many other African countries where the situation is similar.
Yes.
So what do you think our governments should adopt in that regard, so that we can be able to connect from one country to another, especially for trade purposes?
Thank you very much. In the past, the AU has explored the issue of the Africa Pass as a single Africa visa. The way you are seeing the Schengen countries, that once you get a visa for one country in the Schengen, you get to travel all around the Schengen countries. So Africa Union is exploring the Africa Pass, so that once you get a visa into one African country, that should take you all over. This would be important because it would help our people, especially those who are operating at the level of small and medium enterprise, to travel easily. Because for starters, these people are trading a lot of cross-border. You know, there's the official URA thing, but there's a lot of cross-border movement which takes place because these communities don't even recognize the border. These communities see themselves as one. Okay, so they trade, they move, they marry, they will stay in one country, study in another country, they are sick in one country, seek treatment in another country.
Because so in some cases, you're going to find a road that is the one separating.
Sometimes it's a road, sometimes it's a river.
Yes.
We used to have houses on the Uganda-Kenya border where the bedroom would be in Kenya and the sitting room is in Uganda. Of course, they were
in Europe,
accused.
there is also places like that where one part of the house is in one country and the other.
On the Uganda-Kenya border, there was a lot of concerted effort to break those houses because they saw them as smuggling rings. So we put up a lot of these tariff barriers against us, ourselves, which are of no use. But anyway, going back to your question, is the Africa Pass is being explored, but of course some countries still maintain visas.
Yes.
It is sad that on the African countries still speak of illegal immigrants when they are referring to themselves as Africans. And I think that is unfortunate because we are equally being exploited. And instead of getting together, we are really talking about the other one who is coming to infringe on our resources, which are not even there in the first place. So summits like G77 should help us to focus on some of these. But talking of that, we've had countries like Kenya. I think last year Kenya decided to remove visas for all visitors in the country. It has been seen as a way of boosting trade, particularly tourism, sorry. So there's that. I think Rwanda has followed suit. So With time, I think we are going to see more countries removing visas so as to boost trade. And that should help a great deal. But going back, why do countries have visas? And as a person who deals with mobility exchanges of foreign students, I've realized countries like Uganda have one of the cheapest visas for our people, which only charge $50. And we have been charging, and our online system is one of the easiest ones. We've been charging this, I think, largely for visa handling purposes. And so it is easier for students from other parts of Africa to come to Uganda either to study, because Uganda charges the lowest visa to come in, but also when they come in, it becomes easy for them to process their student visas. So once we know what is the goal we are trying to build, if we are trying to build an African Union, and in both intents and purposes, we have to rethink some of these barriers that make mobility and collaboration very difficult. There are countries, and I can assure you, I think when I say Africa is Uganda is the cheapest, it's because countries like South Africa are not only expensive, above $100, but also very difficult for foreign students to get into. Countries like Nigeria you can easily get into, but the visa cost is around $100 plus for foreigners, including students. So I think we need to reflect as African countries, and I hope the G77 is going to talk about it, because not just trade, it is also mobility of higher education, mobility of other people, especially for healthcare. You've seen how most of our people go to hospitals into Kenya and things like that, because those are the things which bring us together. We don't only get together for trade, we get together for education, we get together for traditional ceremonies, around marriages, around birth, we get together for life. Thank you.
For life, yes. We are doing life together,
yes,
so to speak. Well, today Uganda has officially kicked off the G77 plus China summit, and President Yoweri Museveni has received the mantle to be the chairman of the summit. Previously, the summit was held in Cuba. Cuba's Vice President, His Excellency Valdez Mesa, was the one who passed the baton to President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni to take charge from now going forward. And this year's theme is leaving no one behind. And on that note, we are trying to see or unpack ways through which women, especially in the developing world, cannot also be left behind. Like the Professor Sarah Sali that we are speaking with this morning, like she said, women have been left behind in different corridors. You see, in areas of production, you will see that probably even in agriculture, you're going to export certain products like coffee, but then you won't know who was tilling the land, who was weeding, who was in charge of harvesting. And she says that mainly in most cases, when you look deeper, you're going to find that it is women that are doing this. But where are they in these talks? And how do they benefit from summits like this? Now, like I said, the theme this year is leaving no one behind. And in his speech, President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni said that developing countries are facing unique challenges that need to be looked into. He said that you cannot say leaving no one behind. Leaving no one behind cannot be achieved unless you look into the unique problems that are facing some of these countries. Now, coming back to you, Professor, when we speak about the unique challenges different countries are facing, but now light the torch and center it around women globally, but mainly let's look at the women in the South, women in developing countries like Uganda. What are some of the unique challenges women face?
Thank you very much, moderator. One thing we need to understand is actually these challenges are not separate. The president is right. Our president is very right. What countries like Africa or the global south is facing is what we call a poly-crisis. It's not even one crisis. Many things, many bad things occurring at the same time. So they bombard the system, they bombard the services available, they bombard the capacity of those states to cope with the polycrisis. I can give an example of a polycrisis. You have drought. This drought comes hand in hand with hunger. You already had poverty. Then you have a drought coming, then a conflict coming, then an environmental crisis. Okay, we have talked already about drought, but also like a flood. Then you have poor health. So these things are occurring at the same time, in the same space. And that's why when you listened to the UN Secretary General, one of the things he said, we need to pay attention to environmental crisis because there are countries within the G77 which are threatened, their whole existence is threatened just by an increment in temperature, in 1 degree of temperature. The island nations.
Yes.
If we don't pay attention to global warming, and these are already one poor countries, if you don't pay attention to environmental crisis, they keep losing their land mass to the water. One day we shall wake up and you realize those countries no longer exist because they've been swallowed. Now you come to some of our countries, look at the countries where there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of underdevelopment, they are also poor, there's a lot of disease, like the DRC has, of course, has a lot of minerals, that's why it's being fought, but it has had conflict for decades. Then it has underdevelopment, so it has large masses of poverty. You talk about on the gender issue, there are a lot of gender-based violations of all manners, whether you're talking about rape, whether you're talking about human trafficking. Then you're talking about hunger occurring, the same thing. Before they cope with that, Ebola sets in. As they are trying to cope with that, flooding and too much rain, El Nino comes. So
it's one trouble after another.
Trouble after another, or multiple troubles at the same time. Okay? And if you realize, that's one of the reasons why IGAD was formed. IGAD was formed to deal with some of those things, but IGAD largely focuses on the Horn of Africa. So the president's right there. We are in a peculiar situation because our crises, one, they don't end. We move from one to another, but also sometimes they come in a multiple way. So one way to avert these kinds of things is to develop these countries. And I know we've talked about a lot of decision making because politics is so dominant in this country, so we tend to see everything in a political manner. But I can give an example, and I was listening to one talk about China. In the past, China was the destination of cheap labor. But then China went into mass production of its labor force, in high quality labor force. It has so many universities, it has produced so many engineers, it has produced so many scientists, it has produced so many people of a high caliber. So it's no longer the destination for very cheap labor. It is still the destination for labor, but of a certain caliber. If you want to model your phone this way, you want to do things that way, you go to China. Now for us, we remain the destination of actually we're not even a destination for anything because your people are considered uneducated, illiterate, so they cannot even read and be exploited the other way. So they are totally out. Okay?
So in a nutshell, we need to develop our countries.
We need to develop our countries.
Get a competitive advantage.
Yes, but to develop the countries, we need to look at all sectors. You're not going to build a vibrant economic sector when you don't invest in education. And as you invest in education to build the future workforce, you also invest in health to make sure you have the right breed of that future workforce. You invest in industry to ensure that those you have educated have jobs. Right now in Uganda, everyone is decrying poor education, but the whole problem is not actually on the continent. The problem is not education. Education has reinvented itself. The issue, there is no absorption capacity for the education we are producing.
Well, we have been having this conversation with Professor Sarah Sally from the School of Women and Gender Studies, College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Makerere University. And as an educator, my takeaway here is that education has reinvented itself, but there is low absorption, and that is something we need to look into. She said that you cannot develop the country without looking into the education system of that country, or the education, making sure that there is more absorption of education. This is how far we can go with education, because the countries that supersede us in terms of development, production, engineering, science, technology, and mathematics are way above when it comes to education absorption. Thank you so much, Professor Sarah, for having this conversation with us.
Thank you. Maybe the absorption I talk about is absorbing the products from the education sector, which means as you're planning to produce the X number of engineers and graduates and all that, plan for them where they're going to go. Otherwise, you'll end up producing for the global north, you'll remain poor. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this Good Morning Uganda special edition of this weekend. Uganda has today kick-started the summit that is the Third South Summit, or what you may also understand as the G77 plus China Summit, and President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni has taken over the chairmanship of the SEM. We will be bringing you more updates regarding the SEM. Sonko is coming back with Robert Chirabo Nyonyintono to have further discussions regarding the SEM. My name is Olive Monica Najama. Thank you so much for being part of us. Stick around.
Any irritations? No more rashes and irritations. Movit Herbal Jelly and Herbal Soap is rich in natural herbs for a smooth and glowing skin.
Movit All Day Confidence.
In the production process of Aquafina, we expertly filter every drop, providing clear and perfect tasting water to help you keep hydrated with the added benefit of minerals. Aquafina is bottled by Pepsi Cola International in Uganda and is available at only 1,000 shillings.
The energy of this land was born in the hearts of these men, of these women. It comes to life in the power of these colors, and the memory of this sense. The energy of this land comes from here. It comes from Africa, and it vibrates in each of us.
Empowered by Africa.
Oryx Gas, powered by Africa.
Thank you. Hello, Eric. Come and see my new home.
Are you looking for the best quality paint for your dream home? Be part of the new revolution with our Global Paint Silk Vinyl that gives you beautiful, shining interior walls, as WeatherCoat gives you never fading and strongly guarded walls against bad weather conditions. Located along Namavi Industrial Park, Global Paints, a reliable product.
Well, welcome everyone to the biggest game on the continent.
And you have to. You've got to just seize those moments and enjoy them as much as you possibly can.
The 38th NRM Liberation Anniversary is a day when we remember our countrymen and women who fought for 5 years to liberate Uganda from the political anarchy that had characterized our journey since 1962. The NRM government has registered a lot of achievements in democratization, prosperity for all, social services such as roads, health services, education, access to markets, among others. This year's celebrations will be held in Jinja City on Friday the 26th of January 2024 under the theme Building a Uganda that we all cherish. UBC will broadcast the event live on television and on all our radio networks.
We'll be back from the break, and we're back here to analyze for you what has been transpiring at day one, so that you, our viewer, will definitely be in sync with us this particular morning, rather this particular afternoon as we speak, because day one is seemingly about to come to a closure at the Speak Resort Munyonyo. If I'm to take you through the activities so far for the G77 summit, or the third summit that has been transpiring at the Speak Resort Munyonyo. Of course, when you look at the activities, the arrival of the heads of state, that was done and dusted. The arrival of heads of state and government. The official group photograph, there was slightly some changes. It did occur after the opening remarks of the group of heads of state and government. Of course, looking through, and what we are definitely going to be going deeper into analyzing for you this afternoon is looking at the opening ceremony speech that has been from His Excellency Salvador Valdez Mesa, the Vice President of the Republic of Cuba and the current chair, or the former chair as we speak now, of the Group of 77 and China. And of course, that was before the address of His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who took over. But then we also had a representative for the address by the head of delegation of the state of Qatar, and the official handover of chair of the Second South Summit to His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda, and of course he's now the chair of the Third South Summit. But besides that, also we had the address by His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda, of which we are also going to be diving deeper into his speech this afternoon. Then further and beyond, we had the address by His Excellency Dennis Francis, the president of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The last of the few speeches of the day was coming in from His Excellency the Secretary General of the United Nations, that is Antonio Guterres, who had his views on the G77 summit. And as the proceedings continue, is a plenary session of the heads of state and government heads of delegation, which is closed. And by the end of it, there will be luncheon hosted by His Excellency Dr. Museveni in honor of heads of state and government and heads of delegation at the Sunset Restaurant, that is still Speak Resort Munyonyo. And well, of course, now here we are. Robert Chirabo Nyonyi is with me at Broadcast House here in studio to go deeper in the program of the day for day one. Robert, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. First, I must say it's been a success. Day one has been a success, at least the first quarter of it, because first, all is moving as planned. We had the arrival of guests, we had the official opening, we had the handover to His Excellency, now to be chairing the G77 plus China, and listening to all speakers. They have one commonality, that they have all touched 4 critical areas, and these are what have dominated every speech so far, right from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, coming to the Vice President of Cuba, then His Excellency Kaguta Museveni, even the President of the United Nations General Assembly. All these were rotating on 4 major principles. One was how far they have gone in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Since 2015, how far have they gone? And this is where you see that majority of them came out and said, we are failing. President Museveni said at least we have been able to realize half of this. When we look at Antonio Guterres, he said, well, we are moving at a snail pace.
Yes.
And for Africa, I think we're engaging a reverse gear due to the numerous wars we are having in our country, the element of COVID-19. So moving to achieve the Millennium Sustainable Development Goals, more so goal number 1, leaving no one behind, but as far as poverty alleviation.
Yes.
How far are we going as far as ending poverty by 2030, alleviating poverty, these gender disparities and all that?
Yes.
Then the other area was the debt burden. All of them talked about the issue of the debt burden. And along the debt burden, the soaring debt burdens for these countries in the south as an issue. And along that, they brought in reforms, pushing for reforms at the various international financial institutions. The way they are structured, they are saying it is ancient. It does not suit the current challenges of the developing countries under the G77. It doesn't take them any far. Now they must bring together efforts and push for reforming of these institutions. Because these countries go there to get monies, but the way it was programmed, it's ancient. It cannot help them. If these countries continue going there for loans,
yes,
it doesn't favor them. But also, the other issue that came out properly was conflicts. The wars in different countries. You can look at South Sudan. I think that was Antonio Guterres who mentioned it, that you have a war in South Sudan. Then you go to also Congo, you're having war there in different areas of these countries. These conflicts. Actually, he mentioned that there was a time they thought that this would be gone and done with. Issues like coups, that in the 21st century, or where the world has reached now, these would be stories of the past. But it's derailing to achieve the SDGs when we are still soaked in conflicts. The issue of Palestine and Gaza also featured so prominently, speaker by speaker, saying we cannot look on as our people are dying.
Even the UN Secretary actually further re-echoed on the same issue.
Yes, that continuing saying we can't have a two-state is something that we cannot continue tolerating. We must go that way and see that there is peace in this region. But also the issue of climate change. Our president, another president of the G77 plus China, emphasized, because most of these developing countries, you find that their bedrock is agriculture. Now, the impact of climate change on agriculture, we've seen drought in most, if you look at the Great Horn of Africa, if you look at all these regional blocks, of which many of these developing countries are, you find that they have been hit by drought. Then the other side, they have floods. And yet, it is agriculture that they are relying on. So climate change has led to issues of poverty and hunger within these countries. So it came out very properly. And I like the fact that His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Uganda, and also this was further echoed by Antonio Guterres, that the developed world should live to fulfill its commitments in funding climate adaptation projects.
Yes.
For example, in the recent COP, we saw Africa pushing for the loss and damage fund. But unfortunately, much as they try to push for the loss and damage fund, how it's going to be handled, the commitments towards this is something that remains unclear as of now.
Well, just quickly, Robert, I want us to also have a discussion on the fact that while addressing the heads of government and different delegations this particular morning, the UN Secretary General further emphasized on something very important and crucial. He says, although the operation or the cooperation in the South is actually growing, you know, you actually put that into concern that although it is actually strengthening, that the cooperation is strengthening, you get to realize that it does not replace the need for the global North to extend, or the global North commitment to extend engagement in reducing poverty. There's an element of income, the element of income inequality, and also support growth of the developing countries. So when you look at one of the concerns that we had, with the mere fact that maybe most of the countries in the global South are running to the Eastern Bloc, or what you could definitely say, here in this particular issue, you get to realize that the North is also further committed to continuously support these countries.
No doubt. It is just that now, while they are running this side, the North is committed to supporting, but you see, terms will drive you. You know, if, for example, this side is offering these countries cheaper loans,
okay,
you know, if this side is doing non-interference.
Yes.
If you listened to the Vice President of China talking about non-political intervention as one of their bedrock,
yes,
when dealing with other countries. No, so if a country knows that you're going to give it all the support it needs, or the loans it needs, but you're not going to interfere in its politics, it will definitely run to a person who is giving it better assistance. But like you said, it doesn't mean that they are locking away the North, or the North should relax and say there is no need why I should help these countries. But automatically, you know, it's like in economics, demand and supply.
Yes.
Where there is demand, there will be supply.
True.
Now, a person will go to where they get best of what they want.
And of course, as you can definitely see why most of these countries from the South are always looking out for the better.
But there's something also important that our president talked about. He said, we want to respect human rights, but without politicizing them.
Yes. It should be objective.
It should be objective. And this has also been a challenge for many of these countries in the South, that much as they're pushing for human rights, which some will say are God-given, however, there's been so much politicizing of these human rights.
True.
And the other element that was very common in everyone's speech was the fact that they believe that they must continue working together for common interests and ensure that what they have come up with is used as a basis to push for their negotiation on other forums that are coming up. Because remember, we have the Summit of the Future. We have a number of summits actually that are coming up. Now, they are working together. This, the G77 summit, is like giving them what they should continue pushing for in all these summits for the development of these countries.
And well, further to note, you get to realize that some of the reforms that the UN Secretary General did mention, he further echoed on the importance of looking at the fact that the Security Council is being hindered by the geopolitical divisions, and its current composition does not adequately represent the realities of the modern world. So which means that we really need to fit in with the modern world realities in regards to every little decision we make. And then also to ensure that if we are upholding human rights and then we are calling for equality, it has to be in context with the modern world.
Well, I think what he's trying to say in that is that they need to have the reforms at the Security Council that fit in the way affairs are being run today. Because when you look at the Security Council, the various financial institutions where you're talking about financial reforms, by then, these developing countries weren't in the positions they are today. There's so much that has changed. You see? Yes. There's so much has changed. And if these stay rigid, if the UN Security Council is the way it is, and you don't have representation of Africa, you don't have representation of members of the G77, yet they understand their problems better, but they are not part of that vital committee that decides the way forward, then it is irrelevant. If you don't have members of these countries, then how are you better going to understand the dynamics of their conflicts? What are the causes of their conflicts? Who should be the best negotiator? We just had here the IGAD sit. But then you have Sudan, because they have invited a fraction, warring fraction. Sudan says we're not part. We will not attend. Then after it declares for us we are quitting. You know? So how is the Security Council going to understand the dynamics when the people involved, if we are not part of, then it's not for us?
Oh, wow. And well, of course, the Cuba Vice President, as he was handing over the chairmanship to President Yoweri Museveni, did as well congratulate him, and then Uganda upon being successful in regards to hosting the NAM summit that ended yesterday, and also successfully kickstarting off the G77 plus China summits, and also wishing him all the best ahead of what he's likely to face in regards to holding this chairmanship for the next 1 year. That is in regards to holding this chairmanship for the G77 plus China bloc or member states. But now, Robert, let's get into President Yoweri Museveni's speech this very morning, immediately after assuming the chairmanship, this amongst all the member countries present. He has mentioned that there's quite a number of factors undermining the Agenda 2030, which is obviously looking at sustainable development goals. And this was something that most of the countries have been re-echoing throughout the entire discussion this morning, and amongst the key things that we expect to table. But of course, he did say that as member states, we should be committed to ensure that we eradicate poverty. And that is a commitment that all the member states have to be having behind them. What is your take, in the key points of President's speech today?
First is the issue of the human rights. That was very vital. But also him looking at how fast can we ensure that we achieve the sustainable development goals. Trying to awaken his colleagues that we set this down 2015. Okay. 2030 is not very far from us. We are in 2024. But look at the snail pace we are taking. And you see, Goal number one is actually fighting poverty. But how are we going to fight poverty when we are still soaked in conflict? So we need to address the conflicts. How are you going to fight poverty when a big chunk of your budgets are still going to defense? How are you going to fight poverty when a big chunk of your budget is looking after refugees? You see, how are you going to fight poverty when majority of your resources are you're still providing minerals, they're being taken from you, and then value added, and you're still importing. You're importing more than what you're exporting. So you should have efforts geared at that sustainable development goal number one, eliminating poverty. Now, that is what the president is saying. Let's have deliberate efforts. Let's remove these bottlenecks that are keeping us derailed, that we move a step, then we come back. You see? How are we going to fight poverty when he says let's cooperate together? How are you going to fight poverty when you are still closing borders for one another? How are you going to fight poverty when you have issues like the Somaliland issue?
Okay, but you know, he also further, mentioned that we are still united as the members of the G77 in regards to demanding the developing countries, or the developed countries rather, to, push and get support from them. He did say, because they want to demand for support, continuous support from the developed countries to fight hunger, to fight food insecurity, to fight poverty. All these are some of the key things that he said that we should continuously stay united as members of the G77.
Well, first I want to say that even having this successful meeting, in my opinion, having all these countries represented in Uganda is a sign of unity. That is a sign of unity. When we see these meetings, yes, some are closed, but we've not had delegates protesting or going back, and all this is a sign of unity. When we have these final communiques, final declaration is a sign of unity, to push for a single voice. But remember, that said, there are still other factors. Now, you have various countries, because of personal interests, and having allegiance, paying allegiance to different powers that be.
And well, of course, on your screen right now, what you're seeing is what we are likely to be bringing to you immediately after our discussion here. There is a press conference that is slated to start or kick off at exactly 30 minutes of 12 o'clock, and we will be heading right there at the Speak Resort Monyonyo to give you more proceedings from what we expect as the country has kicked off, or the G77 summit has kicked off or commenced today. So we shall be getting further details from the same press briefer, and of course that is coming in immediately after our conversation here. So stick around, you, our viewer, as we continue to give you more of what is coming in from the G77 summit. Robert, as you were saying, on the same matter, before we even get back there, I want to also quote a few words as well from the president's speech, where he highlights and says, as the G77 and China, we should continue to work collectively to ensure that we achieve an international economic order that is just and equitable, as envisaged 59 years ago at the founding of the group, the key economic order.
Now that takes us back. When they talk about the economic order, they add the word just, fair, and equitable comes in.
Okay.
Because they look at the current economic order that is not favorable to the developing countries. So how do we work together to push for that which is just, where there must be reforms? Can we have them? I'll give you, when you look at a developed country, go to these international financial institutions and get a loan. They have easier terms of paying back.
Yes.
But also the interest rate is less. Yes, those who have done economics will tell us that because African countries or developing countries, they are risky. The risks are very high. And these developed countries, for them, the risk is very low. But also, these structures keep them continuously indebted. So, the economic order they are looking at, how best can we move away from this? Because it's not all, there are issues that even when these countries want to move and shine, there's still structural challenges that are walls in here that they can't overcome. Unless they push for, within solidarity, if they push for these reforms, and then they can have better terms to move forward. Otherwise, it may remain them going to these countries and saying, forgive us of our debt burden. Then they are forgiven. Then the next few years they are back at the same thing, unless they look at what are these challenges that keep us going through.
Well, and of course the President further highlighted the fact that in the same commitment to meet the 2030 agenda, you get to realize that Uganda has focused more on ensuring that they set out strategic plans to achieve the agenda for sustainable development goals. I think with the SDGs, every year, this is something that the government passes through the different kind of, when you look at the National Development Plan, that is ideally National Development Plan 3, government's initiatives have always been aiming at the sustainable development goals as well and achieving the Agenda 2030. So furthermore, as you look at the G77 summit, you do realize that the member states under the G77 plus China, the focus is also to liberate the developing countries from the level of developing to a level of developed. So which means from financial crisis to financial independence. But I don't know, when you look at some of the issues here, according to the speeches we've had today, you do realize that there is still a long way to go, but we are having a step in the right direction.
Well, you would say a step in the right direction. One, because now we have, and it has been there since 1964, a strong voice to which we speak, a strong voice of which we can push for reforms. But underneath, there is also groundwork. Because when you look at the establishment of the G77, it is more or less that these developing countries have a caucus within the United Nations, if I may say that. The G77 is more or less a caucus at the UN, because this is an intergovernmental organization of, and it's the largest of developing countries under the UN or in the UN. But much as you want the UN voice, internally within these countries, there is homework to do. So how best have they perfected this homework?
And well, besides that, as we've summed up with our conversation here, let's head to the presser at the Speak Resort, Monyonyo. As you can see, more delegates are going to be addressing the media. Speaking of which, the UN Secretary General is on your screen. Let's head to Speak Resort right now.
It is a pleasure to be here in Kampala and to meet the leaders of two of the most important partners of the United Nations, the non-aligned movement and the G77 plus China. Their voices, championing solidarity, sustainable development and South-South cooperation, are foundational to the United Nations. The contributions to UN peacekeeping forces are unmatched and irreplaceable, and their commitment to multilateral solutions is an antidote to our ailing world. Across the globe, democracy is eroding, populism and extremism are increasing, our